Michael's peaceful life in a quiet Texas suburb was shattered when Karen, the relentless HOA president, kept smashing his mailbox for no reason. Her smug cruelty and abuse of power made every day a small battle, leaving him frustrated and powerless. But Michael had a clever plan, a seemingly ordinary mailbox that was anything but defenseless, turning the tables on Karen in the most unexpected way. And just wait until you see how this showdown unfolded, and why justice in the end finally prevailed. My name is Michael, and I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb in Texas. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knows each other, or at least thinks they do. Life was calm. Mornings were filled with the sound of birds, the occasional lawnmower, and friendly nods from neighbors walking their dogs. I had just moved in a few years ago, and I loved it. I thought this would be a place where I could finally feel settled, maybe even make some friends. Everything was peaceful, almost idyllic, until Karen came along. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the president of our homeowners association, and from the moment I met her, there was something off. She carried herself like the neighborhood sheriff, always inspecting lawns, mailboxes, even the angle of garden gnomes. Most of the time, I could ignore her. But then she noticed my mailbox. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. A slightly weathered wooden box with a hand-painted house number, leaning just a little to the left. To me, it had character. To Karen, it was a crime. She came up to me one morning, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed, and said, "Michael, this mailbox, it's unacceptable. It ruins the aesthetic of our community." I tried to explain that it was functional, that it fit the style of my house, but she didn't want to hear it. She wasn't just pointing out a flaw, she was declaring war. At first, I thought she might file an official complaint, something I could address properly. But no, Karen didn't play fair. The next week, I noticed something strange. My mailbox was leaning at an unusual angle. I assumed a gust of wind or someone brushing against it had caused it. But then it happened again. And again. It wasn't accidents. It was deliberate. Slowly, day by day, it became obvious. Karen was using her car to hit the mailbox. Lightly at first, almost as if testing me, testing how much I would tolerate. At first, I laughed it off. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she didn't even notice. But then, it escalated. The knocks grew harder, more aggressive, and the leaning became more severe. One afternoon, I went outside just in time to see her drive past, her SUV nudging the mailbox with a calculated precision. She didn't slow down. She didn't act like she had bumped into anything by accident. She looked at me and smirked, just a quick, knowing smirk, as if she had won some invisible game. I was furious. I could feel my chest tighten, a mix of disbelief and pure rage. How could someone in a position of authority, someone who was supposed to look out for the community, take it upon herself to harass a neighbor like this? My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my coffee cup. Every time I thought about it, my stomach sank a little more. It wasn't just the mailbox. It was the principle. It was the audacity of someone thinking they could intimidate me without consequence. I spent that night pacing back and forth in my living room, replaying every encounter in my head. The way she had spoken, the way she had smiled as if she had already claimed victory, it gnawed at me. I considered reporting her to the HOA board, but somehow I knew that wouldn't be enough. She had allies, people who trusted her judgment simply because of her title. The next morning, I stepped outside, heart pounding, hoping maybe it had been a one-time thing. I approached the mailbox cautiously, almost expecting it to be fine, but my stomach dropped when I saw it. My old mailbox, the one I had repaired countless times, was completely destroyed. The post was splintered, the little door hanging by a hinge, and pieces of wood scattered across the driveway. I stood there frozen for a moment, staring at the wreckage, trying to make sense of it. And then the anger hit me like a tidal wave. It wasn't a small frustration. It was a burning, uncontrollable fury. My hands shook violently. I clenched my fists. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I could see flashes of every insult, every smirk, every unnecessary comment Karen had made over the past weeks, and it all poured together into a single, unrelenting storm of emotion. Neighbors started to notice. Mrs. Patel from across the street peered over her fence, concern written all over her face. "Is everything okay, Michael?" she asked. I wanted to explain, but the words felt hollow. How could I convey the absurdity of being deliberately attacked by your HOA president? How could anyone understand that a mailbox, just a mailbox, had become a battleground? I knew then that this wasn't going to be simple. This wasn't going to be a quick repair and forget situation. Karen had made it personal, and the longer I stood there, staring at the ruins of my mailbox, the more I realized that something had to change. I wasn't going to be intimidated, not by her, not by anyone. My anger didn't just fade. It strengthened into a resolve. This was just the beginning. After the first destruction of my mailbox, I couldn't just let it go. It wasn't about the wood or paint. It was about principle. I wanted to reclaim some sense of control, to refuse to let Karen dictate every small detail of my life. So I went out and bought a new mailbox. This time, I opted for something a bit sturdier, a heavier wood, reinforced posts, and even a fresh coat of weatherproof paint. I wanted it to look nice, welcoming, and clearly unyielding. I figured that if I made it appealing and sturdy, maybe Karen would back off. For a few days, it felt like relief. The mailbox stood proudly at the end of my driveway, catching the morning sun, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like life was returning to normal. I even smiled when neighbors waved at me or complimented the fresh look. Maybe, I thought, this time it would be different. Maybe finally, Karen had nothing to complain about. But it wasn't different. It was a week later when I stepped outside and saw it again. The mailbox had been knocked over, not slightly tilted, not leaning awkwardly like before. It was lying flat on the ground, the post cracked, the door dangling loosely, and the neat, fresh paint scuffed and scratched. My stomach sank in a way I hadn't anticipated. I felt that familiar sting of disbelief mixed with frustration. It was happening again, and it wasn't an accident. I saw her then, Karen, walking along the sidewalk with that same smug expression she always wore. She didn't glance away. She didn't act apologetic or embarrassed. She just smirked, almost daring me to confront her. At that moment, I realized there was no misunderstanding, no coincidence. She was doing this on purpose. My mailbox wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a target, a symbol of her power over me. Powerless. That was the word I kept repeating in my head. She had the authority of the HOA, the unspoken influence of being a leader, and she was using it in the most petty and personal way imaginable. Every time I tried to fight back through conventional means, explaining myself, filing complaints, documenting the damage, it felt like hitting a brick wall. There were rules to follow, forms to fill out, and meetings that went nowhere. And even when I followed all the protocols, she seemed untouchable, shielded by her title. It was exhausting. I began to notice subtle changes in myself. I would hesitate to step outside, wondering if she would appear at the exact moment I was near the mailbox. I found myself double-checking every repair, measuring angles, tightening screws, repainting scratches, trying to stay one step ahead, but always feeling a few steps behind. It was like playing a game I hadn't signed up for, where the rules were unfair and the opponent had endless advantages. And the worst part? The sense that she was enjoying it. I could feel it in the way she walked past, in the almost imperceptible glance over her shoulder, in the way she made eye contact with me for just a second longer than necessary. Every time I repaired the mailbox, it felt like a small victory that she was determined to undo. Every time I saw it damaged again, it felt like she was saying, silently, but clearly, "You can't stop me." I started doubting myself. Was I overreacting? Was I making a mountain out of a mailbox? Friends and neighbors tried to offer advice. Some suggested ignoring her. Others suggested escalating to the HOA board. But nothing seemed to feel right. Ignoring her would mean conceding defeat. Escalating might just give her more ways to twist the rules in her favor. Each option came with its own sense of humiliation. Some nights I would lie awake thinking about it. Thinking about how one person could turn such a small thing into a constant source of stress. I felt trapped. The mailbox wasn't just an object. It had become a symbol of my struggle for dignity. And yet, Every time I considered giving up, I felt the sting of humiliation even more sharply. How could I let someone undermine me so completely in my own home over something so trivial? At the same time, I couldn't deny the fear creeping in. What would she do next? Would she escalate further? Would she try to interfere with something bigger, something I couldn't control? The uncertainty was exhausting. I started to notice myself tensing whenever I saw her car, expecting the worst. But despite all the pain, frustration, and doubt, there was still a small flicker inside me. A tiny, stubborn refusal to let this go. I didn't know yet how I would fight back, or what my next move would be. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be her victim forever. I just had to find a way to turn the tables. And that realization, that glimmer of defiance in the middle of helplessness, was the first spark of hope. After weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and countless repairs, I realized something important. Fighting Karen on her terms wasn't going to work. Every time I tried to fix the mailbox, every time I tried to follow the HOA rules, she found a way to manipulate the situation, to regain control. It wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about my sense of dignity, my ability to feel safe in my own yard, and the principle that one person shouldn't be able to bully others simply because they hold a position of authority. I needed a different approach, not a reactive approach, something proactive, clever, and lasting. I began researching mailbox designs, materials, and installations. I spoke to local contractors, scoured forums online, and looked into every kind of structure strong enough to withstand repeated impacts. I didn't just want a mailbox that could survive her. I wanted one that would send a quiet, firm message: enough is enough. That's when the idea hit me. Concrete. Solid, reinforced concrete with a steel frame inside. Something that looked ordinary from the outside, but could withstand a small hurricane if it needed to. Something Karen couldn't tip over no matter how hard she tried, no matter how clever she thought she was. I sketched designs, measured my driveway, and imagined the look on her face when she realized her usual tactics wouldn't work this time. Ordering the mailbox wasn't cheap, and the construction took a little longer than I expected. There were moments of doubt. What if she escalated? What if she somehow found a way around it? But the more I imagined the finished product, the more hope began to grow. For the first time in weeks, I could envision a day when I didn't have to worry about whether my mailbox would survive the morning. Installation day came quietly. I didn't tell a single neighbor. I didn't want word getting back to Karen before the plan was complete. I arrived early, watched the sun rise over the quiet street, and felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The crew arrived and started digging deep into the ground, anchoring steel reinforcements into concrete foundations that would hold the mailbox firmly in place. The work was precise, almost surgical. Every measurement, every level checked twice, every steel rod aligned perfectly. As the new mailbox took shape, I could almost feel my confidence returning. The solid weight of it, the way it stood firm and proud at the end of my driveway, was unlike anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't oversized, just a perfectly ordinary mailbox on the surface. But underneath, it was practically indestructible. It represented more than protection. It represented resilience, strategy, and the refusal to be intimidated any longer. I spent the next few days watching and waiting. I imagined Karen driving past, expecting the usual vulnerability, the easy target. I imagined her reaction when she realized her usual tactics wouldn't work. There was a thrill in anticipation, a quiet excitement that was different from the anger and frustration I'd been living with. I felt hope, but it was tempered with patience. I knew this wouldn't be instant gratification. It was a long game, but one that finally felt winnable. Every day, I checked the mailbox, making sure it was secure, admiring the craftsmanship, and reminding myself why I'd done it. Each inspection reinforced a sense of quiet power. I wasn't just defending a mailbox, I was reclaiming my space, my peace of mind, and my confidence. And I began to notice subtle changes in myself. The anxiety that had dominated my mornings was slowly giving way to cautious optimism. I started thinking more creatively, not just about mailboxes, but about other areas of life where I had been reactive instead of proactive. Neighbors began to notice the new mailbox, and some even complimented it. It didn't draw attention to itself in an aggressive way, it just quietly stood there, sturdy and unyielding, a testament to careful planning and patience. For the first time in weeks, I could step outside without tension knotting my shoulders, without wondering if the next moment would bring another deliberate act of intimidation. Most importantly, I finally allowed myself to feel hope. Hope that the battle over the mailbox wasn't endless. Hope that one day I could walk past it and know that it was safe, that my home was respected, and that no one could bully me through petty, destructive tactics. Hope that, after weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and a growing sense of helplessness, I had finally found a way to take control, not through confrontation, but through planning, resilience, and strategy. I realized then that hope isn't just wishful thinking. It's the quiet power that comes from preparation, the courage to act when circumstances seem stacked against you, and the patience to wait for the moment when your efforts pay off. And as I looked at my mailbox that evening, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Calm, steady hope. Karen didn't know it yet, but the game had changed. Weeks of anticipation, tension, and careful planning had finally led to this moment. I had long imagined it, replayed it in my mind countless times, but nothing could have fully prepared me for the reality. The morning began like any other in our quiet Texas suburb. Birds chirped, Neighbors watered their lawns, and the sun reflected off freshly waxed cars. I was sipping coffee on my porch, taking in the calm, when it happened. A dull crash echoed from the street. My stomach tightened. Then came the screech of brakes, the unmistakable crunch of metal, and a sound I would never forget, the sharp clang of impact against something solid. My heart pounded, equal parts fear and exhilaration. I dropped the coffee cup and ran outside. At the end of the driveway stood the mailbox I had poured so much care and planning into. Perfect, unshakable, and still upright. Behind it, the scene was chaotic. Karen's car had collided with the concrete post I had installed weeks before. The front bumper was crumpled, steam rose from the radiator, and bits of plastic scattered across the asphalt. And there she sat, Karen herself, pale, wide-eyed, and utterly shocked. The smugness that had accompanied her every step for months was gone, replaced with disbelief. But it wasn't just me witnessing the moment. The commotion had drawn the entire neighborhood. People who had previously suffered from Karen's petty decrees and relentless micromanagement had stepped outside. They gathered along the sidewalks, some shielding their mouths to stifle laughter, others pointing in disbelief. This wasn't a spectacle of cruelty, it was a revelation. People were seeing, perhaps for the first time, that the seemingly untouchable HOA president could be confronted, and more importantly, that the small, ordinary actions of a determined person could withstand her influence. I didn't rush to speak. I didn't need to. I simply looked at my mailbox, standing solid and pristine amidst the chaos. There was a calm satisfaction in that moment, the kind that comes from knowing you've acted with patience, intelligence, and determination. Months of frustration, countless repairs, sleepless nights, and anxious anticipation had culminated in this silent victory. Around me, the atmosphere shifted. Neighbors who had once avoided confrontation with Karen now exchanged nods and quiet smiles. Some whispered about their own experiences, yards meticulously inspected for minor violations, fines levied for arbitrary reasons, and the constant weight of her scrutiny. The mailbox had become more than a piece of property. It had become a symbol of resistance, of courage, and of the power ordinary people have when they refuse to be intimidated. Karen tried to regain control, climbing out of her car with a forced expression of composure, but the crowd wasn't intimidated. The laughter wasn't cruel. It was the sound of collective relief, of pent-up frustration finally being acknowledged. She opened her mouth, presumably to scold or rationalize, but no words seemed adequate. Her usual authority had evaporated in an instant, leaving only the reality of her actions and the undeniable strength of someone who had quietly prepared for this very moment. I felt a wave of inspiration wash over me. This wasn't just about a mailbox. This was about standing up for yourself in the face of persistent adversity, about using patience, strategy, and resilience to reclaim your space and dignity. For months, I had felt powerless, frustrated, and exhausted. But all that effort wasn't wasted. The payoff was profound. Not only had I protected my property, but I had also shown the community that one person, determined and smart, could challenge unfair authority and win. Karen never touched my mailbox again. She drove past occasionally, always keeping a cautious distance, no longer daring to test the limits of her influence. And my neighbors? Their respect became palpable. People waved when I went outside, asked about the installation, or just shared knowing smiles. I had become, in a quiet but powerful way, a figure who demonstrated that standing up to intimidation doesn't require anger or confrontation. It requires planning, resilience, and courage. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a subtle but meaningful change in the neighborhood dynamic. People began speaking up more, addressing minor disputes directly rather than letting fear dominate their actions. I wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. There were no medals, no awards. But in that moment of triumph, I realized something profound. Ordinary people are capable of extraordinary victories when they refuse to back down. That day, standing before my indestructible mailbox, I understood a simple truth. Justice doesn't always come from authority or rules. Sometimes it comes from careful planning, unwavering resolve, and the courage to believe that a single act, no matter how small it seems, can inspire others and reshape a community. It was a quiet, personal triumph, but one that rippled far beyond my driveway. And as the sun set behind the houses, illuminating the unyielding mailbox in golden light, I felt a sense of satisfaction and calm I hadn't known in months. Not only had I defended my property, but I had also sparked something bigger: the knowledge that anyone, armed with patience, intelligence, and determination, could stand up to injustice and prevail.